says is a victimless crime. There's no victims. By deflating his tax obligations and overinflating his property values, everybody that bought a condominium and its overinflated property values got swindled. So what he gagged when he sold those condominiums at Trump Tower by overappraising his property. He defrauded his the people that bought condominiums and condos in those properties. So he defrauded not only the bank, but he defrauded and overinflated the value of his buildings, which were sold out to people to buy apartment building, condominium apartments in his high-rise buildings. So not only did he commit bank fraud, but also by overinflating the property values, he oversold the pricing of those units, those condominium apartment units, overpriced to the people that bought them. So by Trump arguing to the courts that it's a victimless crime and there's no victims, he's lying to his teeth like a swindler does. He's lying to his teeth. He's a drifter. He's a con artist. So his arguments fall flat. And in Spanish we have we have a word for him. He's a caripelao tramposo. That's in Spanish. That's what we call people like him. A caripelao tramposo. Tramposo. He definitely is a caripelao, and he's a tramposo. And for him to say it's a victimless crime, Your Honor, when he's arguing that nobody was victimized by him overinflating his properties and committing bank fraud by overvaluating his properties. Not only did he commit bank fraud and defrauded all the holders of those banks where the money came from, the people that own savings accounts in those banks, is that the bank takes those saving accounts money and lend it forward in real estate to make profits. So if he overvalued his properties, he committed bank fraud and defrauded every saving holders in those particular bank that lend them overextended hundreds of millions of dollars to him because he overinflated his properties. And those people that bought condominium apartment building condos at his particular Trump Towers, they got defrauded by overpaying based on the value of the building. So if the building was appraised for hundreds of millions of dollars more, and it wasn't that, it was way less than what it got appraised for, then that overappraisal was stated to the people that bought condo apartments at his building. So he defrauded his tenants that he sold those condominium apartments to by overpricing them. So not only did he commit tax evasion because of it, because he deflated it and said that he was indebted and that the properties weren't worth that much, so he can escape paying tax obligations to his properties to the IRS. So he committed tax evasion, but bank fraud. And like I said, when he accuses that there's no victims, yeah, everybody that bought a condominium apartment in a building that was overinflated, over appraised, those people got swindled out of their investments by buying condominiums in his Trump Towers. So yeah, there was a lot of victims to go around. And that's what you call a caripelao tramposo. And if he committed bank fraud and tax evasion on those properties in New York, then that means he also was committing the same fraudulent behaviors through his property holdings throughout the country. So it shouldn't be just limited to New York when it came to tax evasion and bank fraud. if he did it to his properties in New York, he most likely committed the same bank fraud behaviors and tax evasions to the rest of his stakeholdings in different states. So it should be a federal prosecution uh, to 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 sort out how far did the bank fraud and the tax evasion, how deep did it go? And I'm pretty sure it's beyond New York. He has properties in different states within the United States. So if that was his policies in New York, committing tax evasion when it comes to his properties and bank fraud, then they will have to look at every property that he owns throughout the country, the IRS, and figure out, was he committing tax evasion not only in New York but in other states. So there should be the Justice Department should look into, because the Treasury Department is just not limited to New York. The Treasury Department with the IRS is federal. So if he's committed tax fraud in New York by tax evading, by devaluating the properties when he filled out his tax returns, if he did that throughout the state, then that's a federal indictment of tax evasion. Look at Al Capone. Why Al Capone went to prison for tax evasion. So if so, for Trump to say it's a victimless crime, nobody got hurt, and it doesn't make no sense. Because, like I said, by committing tax evasion, he's defrauding the federal government, and committing bank fraud is like committing bank robbery. He's basically robbing hundreds of millions of dollars and swindling the banks for it. And then the people that end up being victimized are the dumb people that buy condominiums in his buildings, and they get swindled by overpaying overinflated prices based on the property value that's overinflated fraudulently. So he's victimizing everybody that buys a hotel apartment building, a condominium space in this high-rise buildings. They're overpaying for condominiums that are overpriced. So he's defrauding them as tenants when they buy apartments in his buildings. So this is beyond New York when it comes to the IRS. It should be a federal investigation. Did he commit the same malpractices that he was committing in New York? Did he commit the same throughout his stakeholdings, throughout the properties within the other states that he has real estate holdings in? So you cannot just say this is a New York issue, because they already found him guilty in New York, and most likely if he committed this in New York, he committed the same atrocities of business racketeering throughout his real estate holdings in those other states. So they have broader jurisdiction, the government, to have a federal auditing of the IRS, and it should be considered criminal, because if he defrauded everybody that bought a condominium in his buildings, then he defrauded them. Look at CEOs like Enron for committing fraud. They went to jail for committing fraud. Enron, bankers. There's been bankers that committed fraud. Look at the guy with Bitcoin. The guy that owned Bitcoin, the CEO, he committed fraud. He was charged with crimes. So at the end of the day, for Trump to say there's no crime, there's nothing to see here, there's no victims, there's definitely victims. The taxpayers that had to make up for his shortfalls, and they had to pay out of their 9-to-5 paychecks being garnished as laborers. They have to pick up the tab for the years that Trump paid zero taxation. You know, so there's a lot of victims. There's a lot of victims to go around. So Trump can't say, "Oh, this is a way of doing business. This is not should be considered fraud. There's no victims here. Yes, I lied, but I paid it all back. That's no excuse to get along to get away with robbery. When you commit bank fraud, you're committing robbery. When you commit tax evasion, you're just as criminal as any other criminal. Look at Al Capone. He did years for tax evasions. There's been a lot of mobsters that went to jail for tax evasion. So at the end of the day, there's victims to go around when it comes to the poor chumps that Trump sold those condominiums, overinflated condominiums to. They got victimized out of money and swindled out of money by paying more money than the condos were worth. So at the end of the day, it's not only limited to New York when it comes to the Justice Department looking into this type of subject, this type of issue. It shouldn't be just limited to New York. If he committed the same atrocities in New York, business racketeering atrocities, then most likely it was a habitual. He was an habitual habit of him committing the same racketeering frauds, not only in New York, but in his stakeholdings throughout his real estate portfolios that are located in different states. So this should be considered a federal indictment of business racketeering, in my opinion.